You betcha. Well, thanks everybody for coming today. You guys all got a copy of the handout. We've reached a budget target number between the House and the Senate. So I'll run over that real quick with you. Our target's 9645, 296,441, a 1.43% increase. When the Senate issued our budget targets, we were at about a 1.2% increase over last year. The House came in at a 1.61% increase. The governor was at a 1.4%. So we just today finished negotiations at a 1.43. Ballpark numbers, the Senate came up about $20 million and the House came down about $20 million. So Speaker Grassley and I met this morning and we're engaging our budget chairs to begin the process to work through the numbers in the departments that you see in front of you. Those conversations start taking place actually today, at least some of those are starting to take place already. We'll work through that. You know, they'll work through the weekends. We'll get back together next week and finish budding up those numbers and one step closer to us getting out of here this year. So.
Did these budget targets include any kind of gas tax or other revenue increases?
Yeah, no, that's not in the budget currently right now. Yeah, the gas tax, separate conversation tied to property taxes still, but not reflected in these budget numbers. No.
What does this kind of mean in the grand scheme of things with just this body finishing its work for the year? Does this put you on any kind of timeline?
Well, I think I just heard you say this wasn't your first session, right? So, not my first session. I think everybody in the room understands that, even though the path may appear to be simple, it often lies hidden in complexities. I don't know what those are yet. So, without getting ahead of my skis, I think both the House and the Senate are very optimistic that we're close to coming to consensus on some of the other issues we have in front of us, which leads us to a path to adjourn. I'm not sure of a timetable yet.
Does the property tax vote in the House put you closer towards on that path or further?
Yeah, I think the property tax vote in the House kind of showed the position that they wanted to be in. The Senate's bill, there's some differences yet. Let's be honest, right? There's some differences yet. The Senate's approach has always been to try to find a way to provide property tax relief for homeowners in the state of Iowa. We also understand that Iowa has the worst bridges in the country. Our infrastructure dollars aren't stretching as far as they once did. So the House's counter proposal to our proposal has led to conversations. So I think we'll spend some time identifying what each chamber really can't live without, so to speak, in those proposals. And then those anchor points will then be how we build from there and continue the conversation.
What can't you live without?
Well, I mean, I think it's a little too early for us to have that conversation yet. Okay, we're talking like larger scope. What are some of the foundational or fundamental differences, right? The Senate has a soft cap, right? The House still runs 718 in the background. The Senate takes a different approach to multi-res than the House does and the Senate does. We have the gas tax component. The House did not put that in their piece. So some of those foundational components yet are still what we're discussing, right? I mean, we feel pretty strongly about a soft cap or some variation of a soft cap, whatever that conversation looks like. But again, at the end of the day, we're respectful of the House's position. We appreciate them putting something forward. It helps to kind of, at least identify a path we can go down. I think in the next couple of days, we're going to stake out some of those points that we feel and they feel we both need to have in our final negotiations. And those conversations are ongoing. So Speaker Grass and I just met this morning and started that talk. So a little early to get ahead of my skis on that. But the conversations are yielding this fruit. So.
Did you already know the House's position before they took the vote yesterday? Like, are you just being very diplomatic with this? Isn't that frustrating that surely you would have preferred they just said thumbs up to your idea?
Well, I think that would have been path of least resistance, sure, right? I'm sure they would have appreciated us doing the same for them. And so we talked about, who was going to send something to which chamber, right? So we sat down and we visited, because we've been talking about this for 100 days, right, since day one. So our approach was, until we can actually get something off the floor out of our chambers, then we're talking in a speculative manner, right? Because it takes votes to move legislation. So we want to make sure that we had votes. You saw we moved ours off with 44 yes votes. The House had a good vote total yesterday, but I think that's part of the process. And so for the Senate to send something that was workable from our perspective, that our chamber supported, over to the House, and then the House, went through their process with our bill, crafted their amendment, went through the same process, put it on the floor yesterday for a vote, and sent it over. So it helps to identify kind of, again, my previous point, what those foundational, fundamental elements are that we're talking about, and that's where kind of our differences lie still to a little bit, but we'll work through it. I'm very confident we'll work through it.
Are you optimistic that property tax reform will pass by the end of this session?
Very optimistic, yes.
How are conversations going with eminent domain?
So, great question. So Senator Alon's introduced an amendment late last week. Him and I visited about that last week a couple of times. And, you know, the goal is, and always has been, to find 26 Republicans that can support either proposal or idea, right? I'm not there with mine. And so, you know, we've had the conversation. His amendment, well, I can't support his amendment. I was clear on that because it has no eminent domain for CO2. But he took some components of our previous amendment. We had a great conversation about it, and he's talking to caucus members about it. He's trying to build that support in the caucus. We have time left to finish that conversation and see where it goes. So, yeah, I think that shows movement. And again, to my previous point, you know, I understand if people think that this, you know, is easy to solve with the snap of a finger. It's not that easy, right? But, you know, the fact that Senator Lon's, you know, introduced an amendment, you know, continues that conversation. So there's a lot of value in that. Where we land, I'm unsure of that yet. So, but the conversations are ongoing, like I've been saying, and they really are. And that should prove to that point, right? You know, that amendment was introduced, you know, as a counter offer to what my amendment was, and that's how we build consensus. We have conversations about differences in both approaches, and we work to the middle.
So could it change yet from what's been offered, or is it this or that?
I think what we're seeing right now is two different competing amendments. You know, we have the one that I introduced, and we have the one that Kevin's working on, Senator Alon's is working on. I think those are the two hills right now, right? And we're trying to, you know, gather support for either his approach or my approach, and that's what we do. We work with our colleagues, we have conversations, we show the merits of the amendments, and we lobby each other, right? That's what we do. So that's taking place right now.
You've got a couple of tax issues that are out there. One is a vape tax that's associated with pediatric cancer research. The other is the tax break for nuclear reactors. Do you expect both of those debates to be resolved?
I do.
Okay.
Yeah, I do. So we passed our tax increase on vapes and pouches off the floor yesterday, which will generate the money we need for pediatric cancer research, right? I know LSA's fiscal note on that was, I believe somebody told me it was around $1 million. We took our numbers from industry, right, on that. Industry was involved in our conversations. Industry told us what to expect for revenue from the current tax structure that we passed off the floor. Industry knows what they're selling in the state. So we feel really confident that there's $3 million in there to fund pediatric cancer research in an ongoing manner, with the University of Iowa being at the helm of that. And additional revenue then will go into the Medicare Trust Fund, right, which is where it needs to go. So,
Do you feel like,
Medicaid.
is it fair to characterize that despite how complex our property tax system is, it would be easier to find a final agreement on that versus eminent domain pipeline?
well, I think there's lots of complex issues at the Capitol. I mean, they all have different varying degrees of complexity. Again, you know, and I know this, you know, this sounds old after a while, but it's all about having a conversation, building a consensus. It really is. Property taxes is front and center. Eminent domain conversations have been ongoing front and center. At the end of it, when we get to the end of session, it's just a matter of if we can arrive at that point where we've got enough support in either the House or the Senate caucus for property taxes, for example, or either caucus again for eminent domain. You know, we're working through both of those. I mean, you know, again, the fact that Senator Alon's introduced an amendment last week shows ongoing conversations, and you know, we'll continue those conversations. And where that lands, again, I'd be speculating. And if you guys don't know me by now, I hate to speculate on things, right? So.
But you gave us a yes with property tax, and you said if when you talked to eminent domain.
Well, again, little different issue, little different importance based off of both chambers and the governor's office approach, right, to property taxes. And property taxes really are our goal here in the Senate. I believe in the House and the governor's office is to provide real property tax relief to everyday Iowans, right? We hear that every day. You know, and both issues are important, but I feel, you know, property taxes has risen to a different level of importance probably, and I don't mean to sound that in a way that's negative to the other conversation that we're having, but property taxes, you know, impact every Iowan. And that's been something that we've been really clear on since week one in our chamber and with the House and the governor, all introducing plans that have, you know, different varying approaches. But at the end of it, I think that's something that, you know, we'll find a path.
The eminent The eminent domain bill last year passed, not with a party line vote.
Mhm.
You mentioned having 26 Republicans. Is having a majority of your caucus support an eminent domain bill this year necessary to bring it up to the floor?
I mean, you know, Senate Republicans have always taken that approach, right? I mean, our approach has always been policy is good. Policy gets discussed. We find a path to having an agreement in our caucus to move that policy forward, right? That's what we do. And that's what we're trying to do this year. Both Senator Alonzo and myself, with our different approaches to the amendments, having conversations within our caucus to build that support.
So with the budget numbers being agreed to, is it possible we will see a push to come back next week and finish things up, or will it take longer than that to resolve this property tax?
We'll be back at work Monday.
For how long?
However long, I don't know the answer to that question yet. But I can tell you we'll be back at work on Monday.
Have you had any conversations with your Democratic colleagues about their concerns with Larry Johnson's nomination, and do you expect to bring him back up for another vote?
Yeah, so we have filed a motion to reconsider on Larry Johnson. Yes, I intend to have conversations with them to try to, figure out what their concerns were. Democrats broke with decades of precedence in our chamber with the action they took this last week. No notification to either us or the governor's office about their intent to take those nominees down. So we'll have to have a conversation and retool. And the motion to reconsider has been filed on both the nominees that failed to receive the votes in our chamber this last week. So.
But they were pulled from the en bloc calendar, right? So that indicates that there may be some concern about those nominees.
You know, they're pulled from the en bloc calendar, but tradition in our chamber has always been, right, whether we were in the majority or the minority, tradition's always been if there's a concern with a nominee, that concern is relayed to the governor. The governor makes those appointments. Then the governor has some choices to make in regards to that. What happened this week is something that we've not seen in our chamber. We've not seen nominees that's been pulled from the en bloc, but given individual approval. But again, to have that take place without notification to either the governor or to us, typically has not happened before in our chamber. So.
Can you help us understand what is the problem with the animal torture bill and also the play-based learning bill? Both of those passed the Iowa House unanimously. At various points, they were on your debate calendar, they were pulled. What's going on with those?
Well, so on the animal torture piece, Senator Buslow is working that very hard in our caucus. Senator Buslow is having a lot of conversations, and he is driving to a consensus, trying to allay the concerns that some of our members have in the caucus about some language in that bill. And I visited with Senator Buslow this morning on that. I feel he's making inroads on that conversations, and so I'm going to continue to let him do his work. We have time to get that across the finish line. And Senator Buslow is really trying to build a consensus on that. He's working really hard.
Are the concerns over livestock? Because I look at the bill and I don't see how it affects ag at all.
You know, there's a few different concerns that have been expressed to me, but I've kind of removed myself from that conversation process when Senator Buslow decided to take it up. I appreciate his help in this. As a majority leader, I found myself dealing with lots of different things, and Senator Buslow stepped forward to take that one on, and I'm appreciative of it. I've not been involved in any conversations he's had lately on that, so I would be kind of over my skis to speculate.
And the play-based learning.
What those concerns were, generally speaking?
Some of the concerns early on that were expressed to me were, implications about crossover, right? Implications about, what if I do this, or what if this happens? I mean, there was just some questions regarding the bill. I'm not gonna get really far in the weeds with it, I said, but I think those concerns and questions may have moved as Senator Buslow has these conversations, and I'm not trying to get ahead of him on his conversations he's been having, because to my point, he may have allayed some of those fears, there may be new things he's dealing with, but all I can tell you is he's working really diligently to try to get us to a solution on that.
And the play-based learning, is the issue just that it was a Democratic bill originally, or what's the hang up about that?
I'm not familiar with that bill, I apologize.
Okay.
So, again, I'm just not familiar with the play-based learning bill.
Okay.
So.
On the budget, you came up quite a bit on the education number. Does that include the money, this extra $7 million for the paraeducator pay that the House Republicans have wanted? And on the judicial budget, is that an increase for judicial salaries, or where is that extra money going?
Yeah, I mean, so there's been some movement. I'm not gonna get into the weeds on that until our budget chairs have a chance to sit down with the budget chairs from the House and have those conversations. But there are some place card holders in the budget for different initiatives. But again, what'll happen now is the two appropriations chairs will sit down, they'll identify these targets, they'll engage with their budget subcommittee members who will engage with the House counterparts, and those conversations will start to take place more at a granular level. So I think we'll see more stuff sift out in the next few days as this conversation proceeds. So I'm happy to answer questions as we have a more clear picture, but right now I don't want to get ahead of my skis.
What are the chances of the House's 3 strikes, 20-year prison sentence bill going through the Senate?
Great question. And again, I'm going to give Senator Buslow some kudos on that one. He is kind of taking that. We understand it's a priority for the House. It's a priority for us to have safe islands too, right? It really is. We understand there's some concerns with the fiscal note that was attached to when it came out early on. So conversations are ongoing as to how we can make that bill work and still achieve its goal, provide additional safety for Iowans. And so Senator Buslow is working on that as well. And we talked about that this morning as well. I think we're making some progress there. He's got some meetings taking place with some stakeholders on Monday. And then our plan is to meet with the House possibly on Tuesday and talk about counter proposals. Speaker Grassley and I have had great conversations on that. We've been very open with each other as we work to try to find a consensus and the common ground we can live with. And I think we'll do our best to get there.
You read every bill, so you're better equipped for this. But isn't there a Senate bill sort of in the neighborhood of that proposal that came out very early in the session? At a subcommittee?
Yes, but there's some significant differences between that. Yeah, I think part of the conversation is looking at how we get to the worst of the worst offenders, right? I mean Iowa has a fairly low crime rate, fairly low recidivism rate, but how do we get to those folks? The violent criminals that are the repeat offenders. How do we get to those? And how do we also have the ability to have a conversation with somebody who may have 2 strikes but has reformed themselves, right? What does it look like? How do we not capture those folks, unintentionally, somebody that's really worked hard to make their lives better? So, and those are all parts of the conversations that are going on with Senator Buslow and the stakeholders he has at the table. Those conversations will segue into, us visiting with the House and trying to find a path forward with that one.
The bill allowing chaplains in schools was on the debate calendar yesterday, but it didn't get brought to the floor. Can you talk a little bit about why that was and if it's something we'll see on the debate calendar going forward?
Yeah, I did have consensus in my caucus. I didn't have the votes to bring it forward for my caucus, and I would anticipate you not seeing that on the debate calendar this year anymore.
How about the township bill that you passed over to the House? Have you talked with them about that, and do you feel like it's important for them to pass that this year?
I think the House has an appetite for that, I'm being told, right? I think it's important always to provide more transparency in government. I think that's always what we strive for. The bill we sent off the floor yesterday still allows the township trustees to perform a job, but what it also does is it provides the supervisors with an ability to have oversight over their budget numbers. Right now there's a lot of opaqueness in that world, and township trustees, 150 years ago, or wherever I was, they had a purpose, right? I mean, they were the primary form of government in the counties. That they built roads and bridges. If you read the code sections currently, it's interesting the powers they still have. They have the power to condemn property. They have the power to form a police force. But what we were focusing on was their power to levy. And we understand that the levying authority typically comes in 2 buckets, right? It's typically for fire protection, prevention, and cemeteries. And so we wanted to make sure there was some transparency there, some clarity as to how the system functions. So the changes we made were relatively minor. I mean, 70% of Iowa counties already appoint their township trustees. Very few left of them actually have an election process. But what we didn't have, and what the bill does allow, is that supervisors have the ability to have oversight over their budgets. So the funding they're using and the funding obligations they have still maintained for fire districts and for cemeteries. It's a second set of eyes to ensure there's adequate transparency in that process, which I think is essential. Senate Republicans have always been, supporters of governmental transparency, especially when we're spending taxpayers' dollars.
The House has sent you a very large bill related to charter schools and where teacher salary supplement funding goes. It's got language related to homeschools and many other sort of school choice things. Should we expect that to come for a vote?
Yeah, we're having conversations on it. I think there's a path to make that to the floor. Right now it appears that there's a path to make that bill come to the floor.
Before your time, for many years, the Iowa House and Senate had joint budget subcommittees that regularly met. And when I talk to past legislators from both parties, they always tell me that they found those joint committee meetings very helpful. And also, the joint budget targets used to come out a lot earlier than late April. So is that something that you would consider going forward, resurrecting those joint budget subcommittees to help the House and Senate get on the same page a little bit earlier?
Yeah, I mean, so there's two parts to your question, right? So, I guess I'd have to talk to my caucus and see if there's a desire to go back, and that was prior to my time here.
Right.
That was pre-COVID, I'm being told, right? I'm not sure how that operated or functioned. So I'd have to go back to my caucus and see if there's a willingness to, to go back to that system, and I've not had that conversation. As far as setting budget targets, though, I don't see where that improves our ability to get to a budget target any quicker. Budget target conversations are typically, amongst leaders and the governor. I don't know when we get to that point where we've engaged the budget subcommittees, we've already agreed on a target. And I think I don't think that, having joint budget committees would help us get to a target any faster than we have this year, or we typically do.
When, this guy met with, Senator Weiner and Representative Meyer, I asked for a vibe check and got a quote from some 1993 movie that Aaron Murphy watched. Do you have a vibe?
Pauly Shore reference.
What's the quote?
Pauly Shore, they're harsh and my mellow.
Okay, what was the movie?
Some Pauly Shore vehicle, unspecified.
Anyway, as you head into what could be, maybe, possibly, the last week of, what is the vibe among you and your colleagues?
Well, I think our vibe is good, right? I mean, obviously we get to this point in the session, everybody wants to get out of here. We have people that need to plant corn and get back home to their day jobs. I think it's been a good session so far. I think the vibe heading into the last week or two, or whatever the unknown timetable is still good. Yeah, I don't get a sense otherwise.
All right, I think I'm gonna end it at vibe check.